Clayton Patterson. How are you?
Wicker Wacker, how you dacker? I'm late. I'm late for a very important date, but here I am.
No, that's
Where's Julian? Oh my God, what happened?
Always trying to make a good impression, just coming late, like everybody's waiting, and the cool kids come late, of course.
Let's get rocking.
Let's get the party going.
All right, let's go. This is Ray Felix, Ron Perriello, and Lance Mechanic at Bronx Heroes Live. Thanks for coming. We have special guests Julian Voloj and Clayton Patterson here to talk about their graphic novel titled Clayton. So let's get into it. Lance, take it away.
Hey, Julian, as an author in Germany working with universities, what made you take the leap into comic biographies?
Well, actually, I haven't worked with universities in like decades, but so I moved to the States like nearly 20 years ago and worked as a photographer. And I did a photo series on Jewish diversity where I came across a man by the name of Benjamin Melendez. That was like a little bit over 10 years ago. He was a Puerto Rican Jew, but also the founder of a gang in the South Bronx called the Ghetto Brothers. So he shared his life story, which is very fascinating in itself, and it became the subject of my first graphic novel, Ghetto Brother. It really started as a photo essay, and I basically got stuck with him. And there's also a little bit of overlap to Clayton because we both worked in documenting gang history in New York. I focused on the Bronx, which always fascinated me, and Clayton on the Lower East Side. If you guys know the movie The Warrior. So The Warriors actually is based in part on the real events from 1971. So 1971, after a member of the Ghetto Brothers by the name Cornell Benjamin was murdered, there were two ways to go. One was revenge and like a big bloodbath, and the other one was peace. And so Benjamin Melendez decided to have a gathering of all the gangs and brought them together for what is called the Hoe Avenue Peace Meeting at the Boys and Girls Club in the Bronx. And that's basically this iconic moment then started like the street parties in the Bronx. I mean, since we speak about Bronx Heroes podcast, it's really a story of Bronx history that was for a long time really forgotten. And the fascinating thing is they brought the gangs together, created this peace meeting, and then started the parties. There is some overlap. Benji, among other things, was in a gang before he started the Ghetto Brothers that also Kool Herc was a member with. Africa Bambaataa was part of the Black Spades. They became the first hip-hop crew. And Grandmaster Flash, to have the hip-hop troika complete, actually he lived around the corner from Benji and he still remembers the Ghetto Brothers. So if you read his biography also, he mentioned the Ghetto Brothers. So the story was just like such a comic book story. I mean, as a gang, people like the kind of superheroes. And I had not done any graphic novels before, loved graphic novels, but decided to turn his story into a graphic novel script. And took 5 years, and it was really like a grassroots thing. But I was surprised. I mean, there was, Rolling Stone magazine featured it. Junot Diaz picked it as one of his favorite books of the year in the New York Times. One of the few graphic novels. I think there were maybe it's even the only graphic novel on the list. So it really had like a great reception. We didn't anticipate it. And since then, I continued working in graphic novels. I am myself more like a nonfiction reader, so a lot of stuff I do has to do with nonfiction. So in English, there's also my book on Joe Shuster, the Superman creator, that came out with Thomas Campi, Italian artist. Wonderful homage to the early days of American comic book industry. And then last year I had Basquiat, on Jean-Michel Basquiat, the iconic artist, with a Danish artist by the name of Søren Mosdal, who illustrated it. So yeah, so this is like the backstory of some of the stuff I did. So I'm really interested in nonfiction. And Clayton and I, we know each other for probably 15 years. And when we, get into his life story, and Clayton will talk more about it, there's so many fascinating aspects to it that we discussed like trying to do a graphic novel, and we wanted to like break a little bit with like traditional storytelling. But yeah, so we'll get more into this later.
Clayton, being an immigrant who transitioned to New York from Canada, what compelled you to get involved in social justice and film the abuses of the NYPD?
Okay, very good. Yeah, what happened is that I used to document the pyramid a lot. And then on August 6th, 7th, 1988, there became this large police buildup in the Lower East Side. And so normally I went to the Pyramid Club, like on Sunday night, for example, to document Peter Quailoff, now called Son PK. And I got sidetracked into this riot, and that riot really changed my life. It really became, I ended up doing a 3-hour and 33-minute videotape that became known as the Tompkins Square Park.
It just made you aware that there's people watching you.
It don't matter to me. It don't matter to me.
Yeah, right.
What? What do you think?
What? What'd you say to me? What'd you say to me?
Oh, shit!
And then I knew that, it was a very simple concept, really. Like a lot of times everybody wants a lawyer, but if you have a simple enough concept, you don't really need one. And so I knew that they wanted my tape. I got a little piece out. And you have to remember, at that time, Fox News was just another TV station in New York City. It wasn't like now. Now it's like Fox News. It was just Channel 5.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was like, I think Fox News started in the 90s, but that was like, they weren't, the local one wasn't like the ultra right kind of thing. They were more into like gossip, like a current affair and that kind of thing.
Just New York. But Sean, what's his name? Eric Sean, he heard I had this tape, and he was a very good reporter. And so he got a little piece of it and put it on the news. And prior to that, a person by the name of Paul Guerin, who had a shorter video, about 20 minutes, he got his thing on the news, and it's very dramatic. And he was on top of a van and saying, I'm getting down. And that just sort of cracked the whole thing open, because the police had beaten up like about 125 people. I think he ended up going to the hospital and whatever. So it was really a tinderbox. And it's interesting because at that period of time, Koch, says in the news, well, I didn't even hear about it because I was in the Hamptons. And of course, I think the mayor is always being kept abreast by the police department, and everybody's got a telephone, but he was in the Hamptons. Anyway, when they wanted that tape, I didn't want to give it to them. And the reason I didn't want to give it to them is because I knew once it became evidence, I would lose it. It would no longer be my property. It would be government property, and it would be, evidence. So I said, no, you can't have it. And the argument I made, especially at this time, because New York was an art center, and I said, I'm an artist, and it's my art, and it belongs to me. Simple. So there's a movie out called Captured by Dan Levin, Ben Solomon, and Jenner First. And that kind of explains a lot of this story. And I can get you a link to that, and people can watch it for free if you want to kick it out there. But anyway, that kicked me into that world. I went to the Bronx House of Detention. I was under thing called central monitoring. The only two people in Bronx House of Detention was myself and Larry Davis. He shot 6 cops with a gun. I got 6 cops criminally indicted with a camera. So I shot. So it was kind of like that. So anyway, once you're pulled into something, you don't really get out of it. It's like once I was pulled into this graphic novel with Julian, it becomes part of your life, and then it takes on a life of its own. So, and that's the short version.
Yeah. And like, people forget, like in those days, going around with a camera wasn't like it is now, where you just have it on your phone and everybody's filming.
Absolutely. Absolutely not. I mean, the one thing I'm proud of is it became a transitional moment. I take a lot of photographs and videos, and one of the sort of parts of my philosophy is I want anybody to do what I've done. So I have always had commercially available, equipment. I mean, always good equipment. I had the Panasonic AG-155, which was a good video camera, but it was still, you go to B&H and you buy it, Tri-State or whatever. And it was, anybody could buy that. So anybody could do what I could do. But you're right. You have to put yourself into those places to capture that.
Right.
It became a transition point in the history of video, because that became the first time that, an independent person with a camera. Normally, cameras at that time, you had the film guy and he had the light guy and the sound boom. And this was all in one. So this was a new technology for that period of time. And the news, although they would use it because I had it, they would always call me the amateur. So they always tried to push me aside. And then I got the moment where I got an Oprah Winfrey.
Rather than give police the videotape he made of a demonstration turned riot.
It was a police riot. Everybody in New York knows that it was police misconduct. Buy yourself one of these. This is a revolutionary tool. Little brother is watching Big Brother. If you have one of these, and it's cheap and it's accessible, it's a tool.
And I used the concept, little brother, I held up the camera, said little brother is watching Big Brother. And that just sort of really, kicked the whole thing into gear. Cop Watch came out of that. All these different sort of, people understood that they could balance off the police by documenting it. And that still goes on to this day.
Yep, very so. You're like the Zapruder, of New York City. Like you have the Kennedy assassination, and then New York City's, Clayton Patterson's video. I mean, very historic.
Because and it's just you just wonder if things have gotten better or worse since those days, in terms of the way people interact in terms of law enforcement and just people. But back then the Lower East Side was, it wasn't like it is now, where it's so gentrified.
But there's a video out there right now, and a cell phone video, and it's all over Facebook, of these cops roughening up people for not distancing properly on Avenue B. So it's still vital and alive, and that's a very dramatic tape, and it really makes the cops look stupid as bullies.
Bullies. Yeah.
So it really still is happening. But you're right. You can almost neutralize anything in a way.
You really started a trend, and I think cell phones took it to another level with because now you have this on an international. You have a website committed towards police abuses and all these videos, like that one in Florida about social distancing. Them started to beat up 12 guys and arrest 18 people based on people hanging out at the beach. It's like
that's beating people up. That's not very social distancing at all.
Right. They didn't have masks on, and
they didn't have masks.
There was a shot.
Plus, you have to touch them,
Yeah, and beat them up and put your knee on his neck. But there was a cell phone in Oakland where the door just opened. Shh. The guy had the cell phone on. The cop went up, shot the kid in the back. Doors closed. That document went around the world, and you're right. That changed everything.
Clayton, how did you get the name Godfather of Lower East Side? Like, who came up with that?
It was a debate with Julian. He didn't believe me, but I was on the Bourdain. Bourdain looked me up because I had this dope bag. I have a dope bag collection, and he wanted to know. He wanted to see this bag toilet, and I had that bag by chance. So he got in contact with me, and he called me the Godfather of Lower East Side documentary.
Oh, really?
But I want to also get into how I met Julian, because as we both know, Ray, and probably the other people as well, Ray's a very good salesperson and whatever. And I was making this Jewish history book on the Lower East Side. It was an anthology. So all these writers, and obviously, you know, you can't pay for these things. You know, they're all sort of community efforts. There was 2 people out of about 150 that I had to take out for supper to talk them into it.
He's still complaining about it 20 years later.
Julian pulled it off. But thank God, because Julian's, you know, I'm really happy that we connected, and Julian is an amazing person. And we got talking about this graphic novel, and he and Julian, obviously, because we sort of became communicating, because he hooked it up so I could document Karate Charlie and Yellow Benji and like that. And so he told me that he made this graphic novel, The Ghetto Brothers, which I'd known about, but it took him 5 years. So I said, let's just get as many artists as possible and get, you know, multiple chapters, then each person do a chapter, so maybe we can cut it down. Because I'm in my 70s. I'm thinking, God, I don't want to wait 10 years to make a graphic novel. And working with Julian has really been a pleasure. He's a bit of a taskmaster at times, of course.
Right.
But he's very sharp, and he really does get things done in a very good way. And he brought us together, Ray.
That's true. Very true. Julian is the social engineer of this graphic novel. You know, is getting people together. Definitely.
I mean, it really is like a grassroots effort. So it's so different than any of the other books where you work with one artist who's really into this topic, and they, you know, for example, the Basquiat book, the artist is a huge Basquiat fan and really created like a Basquiat-esque book. But here it was different. So we were thinking about how to do it as like something that also represents Clayton. And there are 2 elements. One is everybody knows Clayton. 161 Essex Street is like the unofficial like community center of the Lower East Side. People come. So it's really like a place that brings people together. And so the graphic novel is in a way the same thing. So we brought artists together. We have some established artists who work with Harvey Peaker and the likes. We have others who never did a graphic novel. We had some people self-published. So really, it's like all different levels that, you know, came together through this to make this project. But also the other interesting aspect is that Clayton has such a fascinating life with, you know, he created the Tattoo Society. He documented the drag queens. He was there for the Tompkins Square Riots. So all these experiences are very different in itself. And so by having different artists illustrated also illustrates the diversity of Clayton's experience. And then the other thing that is actually unique to this, so for those who've seen American Splendor, so American Splendor is like basically the blueprint for autobiographical comics. You know, Harvey Peaker series going on forever. The movie also, like, you know, big successful movie. So we take a little bit like the language of the movie, the visual language, by having this photo comic as the glue between the scenes. And this was also important to me because Clayton is a photographer. So by having this photo comic and actually also showing Clayton his place and so on, this is something that if we had illustrations would not be the same. So it really gives that this photorealistic element to it. And it really works nicely. It was an experience because nobody had done it before, but it really worked, which is nice to see.
Talk about the cover, Julian, and the...
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is, and maybe when we now have like the final video cut, you can actually see the cover on the screen and try it out. So you can download an app with RTV. It's like an Austrian-based app company. And once you have the app and you hold your phone over the cover, or in this case over the computer screen so that you can see it, you will see a 45-second video clip that Clayton recorded. It's like an augmented reality tie-in. And again, it's like a community thing because there's an organization called, organization or store or whatever, film studio called Jump Into the Light on the Lower East Side, like 2-minute walk from Clayton. And we approached them, that's, listen, we're doing this graphic novel, we showed some previous work, and they agreed actually to do it as part of this community effort. And so, yeah, we have so many different ways where storytelling is not the usual storytelling. So I feel like, you know, download the app now, try it. We'll have it probably like you know, on the screen right now when people see it, and you can see Clayton for 45 seconds, which is amazing.
Hi, my name is Clayton Patterson. I moved to New York in 1979. That's when living was easy, rent was cheap, food was inexpensive, and you had a whole wide range of possibilities available at your fingertips. Over the next 4 decades, I accumulated hundreds of thousands of photographs, a few thousand hours of video, and a wide range of ephemera. And then I met Julian Voloj, and he came up with the idea of doing a graphic novel. So we gathered a crew of artists together. We got the graphic novel done, and then we got the blessing on the graphic novel by Anthony Bourdain, calling me the Godfather of Lower East Side documentary. Hope you enjoy the graphic novel. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. What's the creative process? Because between Superman and the Ghetto Brothers, and then I know you're working on something on Kirby, and then you mentioned Finger, Bill Finger. I mean, what makes you decide these topics? Like, and then you have Clayton, of course. They're all diverse. Like, what makes you decide who you're going to work on?
So I mean, I feel like the key is that I do books that I do for myself in a way. I mean, I do books that I want to read myself, and this is not necessarily. I never think about who's going to buy it. When we did Ghetto Brother, I thought, you know what, I'll print a few copies myself. If someone buys it, great. If not, I don't care. And the same with Clayton. Clayton is an old friend of mine. I know his life story. So I really thought, there's a lot of stories to tell, but I never thought about we're going to have a publisher or we're doing this and that. So it really is like a question of like personal taste, the topics I'm interested in and I want to tell. And then I find a way. Every collaboration is different. So for Ghetto Brother, similar to now the project with Clayton, it based a lot on first-person interviews. So for Ghetto Brother, I interviewed Benjamin Melendez, other gang leaders, and really try to get their voice into the story and then compare it with other voices. Then for Joe Shuster, he died 25 years before the book came out. It was more like research. So I took a lot of the literature that was existing, and it was like a secondhand information that I had, and then sometimes the information were also contrasting each other's opinion on certain scenes, how they happened. And for the Basquiat, it was similar. I think the main difference was that actually I realized that a lot of people in my circles know Jean-Michel Basquiat. But it was an interesting thing that also the opinions about him varied. So some people had not the nicest opinion, and I wanted to show him in his complexity. And so for Clayton, concretely, the process was that probably was like 2017 when we started talking about it, and we once a month met up. So I was recording him, very like the reporter in the graphic novel, coming to him and recording him, on my phone. And we always took one element of his life story and then really went, be it his childhood or his arrival in New York, and really talked over and over to get details. And then in my writing process, I think about the visual elements. How would you tell it? What is very visual? So it's not like a comprehensive biography, which hopefully we'll do some other time, but really the idea is to have like something that also is visually interesting. And there's a lot of more material that we have, but the nice thing is, the more we talk about, you see also like things that link with each other.
Right.
Add in one more detail that's really important. And, Julian is really sharp at getting things out, as we know. He got the Ghetto Brothers translated into 6 languages. I think like Italian, Portuguese, French, German, English. What was the other one, Julian?
You got to tell me that secret, Julian, about how you doing that.
Also French. So French, German, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and English. 6 languages. Yeah.
How are you doing that? How do you get that done? He's
our man.
It's easy. No, I have a good agent. I'm lucky that I have an agent who really, if the product is good and you have someone who has the connections, he hopefully can sell. And I feel like that's the key. I mean, whatever you do, do it as good. Do it for yourself, that you really have like a high standard, that you want to have the best comic possible. And then when people see the quality is good, they will, it will work. I feel like that's the key. I feel like there's so much stuff that is mass produced and not a good quality. And the key is really to tell something that's out of the box. I mean, a lot of the superhero comics you find these days, they have the same narrative. I mean, it's the same story over and over. There's nothing really that is out of the box.
Right.
Clayton's story, you have never heard this way.
True.
There's another point out of the box with people here on the panel, and that's you, Ray. You get to use the title superheroes. Now that's a feat. Tell us about that one. That's a hard thing to do.
I mentioned that in a previous filming, that I think one of the first filmings that we did here. And it was just a big me versus DC Comics. It was 4 years in virtual court on the internet, and I'm about to do it again. So yeah.
Hero.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I try, but
that's hard. It's hard to go up against a major corporation and win, and you did. So that's really heroic.
It is. I mean, it's compromising is, and settling is the new win, right? It's just like, and it looks like I'm heading that way again this time. When you're dealing with the authorities or corporations, you're just constantly, you're up against the wall because they see you as a nobody until you start screaming. And, when you like, hey, I got the Daily News. I know this guy here in the Times. And then, I know this guy in Paris. And then, like Miguel. And, at the time he was living in Spain, and he's the one that really cracked the nut. Nobody in America wanted to crack that story. Not even the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, which they're famous for taking on. The corporations didn't want to take it on. So if it wasn't for my buddy Miguel and Rob Sodaro, who put it on their websites and really blew it up, then Daily News or the UK Guardian, or even a lot of the bloggers like Robert Coleman's, he's like one of the biggest attorneys in New York that covered that. So I think that's the secret, just to get attention on that. But back to you guys. You guys are the guest.
It's also called hard work.
Yeah, it's hard work. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think movies inspired me to do that stuff. But about you, go ahead. You have another question for him.
Yeah, I mean, Clayton, what's your perspective on the gentrification on the Lower East Side?
Oh God, you don't want to hear. You got 2.5 hours.
Yeah, sure.
It's the abbreviated.
I would say, in short, the genius behind New York, which is really the genius behind America, certainly in the cultural world, was cheap rent and inexpensive lifestyle. And that's really that made everything work. And then you had the immigrants. And, between the struggling masses and the cheap rent and the inexpensive lifestyle, I mean, somebody like Ray could be working maybe a day or 2 days in the bar, and then the rest of the week he could work on his comics or whatever. Now people need 2 and 3 jobs and things like that. It's become very unaffordable and difficult to live here. And I think that, it just, once you got to Bloomberg and the international corporations taking over the city and the destruction of the all independent small businesses, it's very, very hard now to come from the ground up, whether it be publishing or being an artist or whatever. They really killed that. They really killed the American dream, and they really killed the possibility of being American and make America great again. Because it's almost impossible now to come to a place like New York and live the same life. And if you look at whether it be comic book people, I'm sure, jazz people, artists, whether it be Jackson Pollock or whoever, they all took years of struggling and surviving, but they had a means to dedicate their time because they didn't need to make that much money to survive. And now when you start getting rents of minimum $2,000 is cheap, that's a tremendous nut to crack. And that has really killed off America. And nobody's talking about that. And that's really what it's really about. It's, people now, you get the Trumps and their kids become, then these become sort of dynasties. You're now getting these political dynasties. Biden's kids are over there in Ukraine doing international corporate business. I mean, all these people's families, whether it be the Kennedys or the Bushes, they're dynasties now. Hollywood's dynasties. Hollywood started off with a bunch of poor Jews on the Lower East Side and in New Jersey, and they went to Hollywood and they created Hollywood. The mafia started down here. All these different bits and pieces is really what made America great. That was probably, I don't know, anybody here gone to Yale and got a master's and came to New York City and make a $1 million career? That's what you need now. Whereas before, you just had to be here. You know, Lower East Side was decades worth of communities, one on top of the other, and remaining bits remained. You know, you had bits from the Yiddish theater, you had bits from the beats, you had bits from the punks, you had all these bits would come together, and they would formulate things. And you go to a place like Seabees, and it was like an old tree that when you cut it, you got all these rings of all the generations that came out of there. Everything now is new. There's no more generational things. And that really is killing America. And it's almost impossible now to be, you know, start on the bottom and work your way up. And, you know, it's, you know, now, let's say for publishing, printing's become so expensive. The only place to do it for cheap is China or somewhere like that. Yeah, that's really wrong. You know, I used to make the baseball caps, and we were independent. We survived by making baseball caps. You know, some of these things you can't do anymore. So they really killed the American dream. And Bernie, who's I look at it as just kind of a loser, he's always using this term socialism. Socialism freaks people out. You go to Texas, they think communists, they want to shoot you. The reality is he wants to be like Israel, he wants to be like Denmark, he wants to be like every civilized country in the world except for America, which allows, every other country allows the education to be reachable for all of their people. Their healthcare systems are approachable for all of their people. It's not for us. And I have one Trump story, and I'll quickly tell you this story, because normally I don't do international politics, because the truth is I'll never meet a Bush or a Cheney or whatever. In 1989, April Fool's Day, they tore down this squat, this woman called Tia Scott. And she was an older black woman, but she obviously was really elegant. And you knew that she was a model or had been like an actress or something, because she just had that dignity. So we didn't want to see her dumped on the street, which is what would have happened. You know, all of her possessions, everything was just dumped in the street. They tore down the building in one day. So anyway, myself and another person, we were getting a lot of press around this movement at that time. So myself and another person were able to get to Trump. Now, I think he thought he was going to get a lot of press out of this. So at first, you know, we went up to the Trump Tower, and we met, we didn't meet him, we met his secretary. She was an older woman, but she looked like she was going to a party at the Met. She was all decked up in jewelry, fine clothes. So anyway, he was first going to do it for a month at the Welfare Hotel, and we said no. So he agreed to a month at the Chelsea Hotel. and the caveat is he stiffed the hotel. So this is 1989. He's the same guy today as he was then, only nobody gets it. All these workers think that he loves the workers because he can talk that language from a distance. Connection to the workers. And he stiffed the hotel, which means he stiffed the maids, which means he stiffed the porters, which means he stiffed everybody. So that's just our boy.
Yeah. he's a real New Yorker, unfortunately.
I don't know about a real New Yorker, but he's a real kind of con artist. Anyway. So
that's what I mean. Like, New York is filled with con artists.
Unfortunately, you and I have met our own ones, but yeah, that's my Trump story. But that's who he is. So anyway, that's my closest I'll ever get to a president.
Right.
Ripping off and not paying the bill.
What's your favorite part of this graphic novel, Clayton?
Julian.
We rehearsed this before. Oh,
you did? Okay.
A lot of projects with a lot of people. And, you know, certainly there's been people that have changed my life. And it's usually not the project, it's the person. Like I met this person by the name of Johan Uhr. I had one line in a book, Modern Primitives, that said Clayton Patterson, President of Tattoo Society in New York. This was 1995. He contacted me to take over famous American tattoo artists and sideshow people to Austria. This story is in the graphic novel. So that person, Johan Uhr, made that whole thing possible for me. I was with Ari Rusimov in the beginning. The two of us created the Tattoo Society. So it was our relationship. The Tattoo Society, he eventually dropped out. He made a movie called Shadows in the City, which is great. Used a lot of people from the society. But it turned around in the end. Then another person that came out of the society was Wes Wood. And the three of us worked together, Catherine Freed, our city council person, Wes Wood, and me with the Tattoo Society. And we legalized tattooing in New York City. So that society changed a lot of people's lives, because it was very impossible to learn how to tattoo in New York at that period of time. Right. And that society, people gathering together, gave them the opportunity to make that mixing and shaking. And so, and then it turned into the tattoo convention of International Tattoo Convention in New York, which was done by Steve Bonji, Butch Garcia, and then the first year, Wes Wood again. And so they got me as the organizers. So those three people changed my life in a big way. That took me into a period, myself and Elsa, was sort of organizing this, helping organize this tattoo convention in New York City. So it's the person. And when I say what's my favorite part of the graphic novel, I'm not being facetious when I say Julian, because if it wasn't for Julian, it wouldn't happen. And that's like with my Etsy site, the savior of that is you. And so it's really based on a person, and that the rest of the ingredients have to come together. And you hope that the person you're working with has those skills to make it happen. There's a lot of people can draw comics. There's a lot of people that can make things, but making it happen and organizing it and pulling it off is really the hard part. And so that really is it's not a facetious answer when I say Julian, because it wouldn't have happened without him.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll tell you how difficult it was to keep the people going and to get them to hand in their assignments and all of that. So my life has always
I know that very well, yeah.
Yeah. I met this woman in 1972, Elsa Renza, and we've been together ever since. And so she was the big bonus in my life, because I come from the bad end of the working class, and the chance of me really accomplishing anything was probably not so great. But meeting her, and she came from an intellectual family and all that. And it was Canada, so they weren't a wealthy family, because everybody, in a way, the government sort of balances everything out. But very intelligent, and she sort of got me through to places where I'd never gotten before. So the people in my life are like, Elsa Renza, Johan Hoer, Steve Bonji, Julian. It's really just, Ari Roussimoff for the Tattoo Society. It's really just a small group of people, and I meet, one about every 10 years. And so the last one was Julian, and so he's been really sort of beneficial. I met this guy in I guess, early 90s, John Strausbach from New York Press, and we always kept our relationship alive. And he's also helped me with this. I'm doing a New York tattoo history. If you know anybody who wants to write or get involved with New York tattoo history, I'm trying to get that done, but I'm at the finishing point, so it has to be now. But it's really a small group of people, and I'm sure you know that, Ray. I think if you think back over your life, when you think of the different projects, like you mentioned, when it wasn't the superheroes, you mentioned 2 or 3 people's names that made it possible. Right. Those are the people. It wasn't necessarily the law case, because a million lawyers that can make a law case. Right. It's that small group of people that really makes it happen. Right. So for me, that list of people are really the ones that changed my life.
Right. That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. You're absolutely right about that.
Julian, don't get big-headed on me. Big-headed is a bad thing.
Julian, what's next? What's your next project? Well, actually, before we even get to that, where can we find this book? Where is it going to be during our COVID-19 hunkering down?
Oh yes, so it will be very back to the roots. Like in the old days when you sold your records from your trunk or your
Right, or doing like prescriptions, mail order prescriptions.
Exactly. So because it's a very weird time right now, we're actually distributing it first ourselves. So probably now you have here in your screen like the address where to order it, right?
Right. Just say it and then we'll type it in.
Exactly. So so the nice thing is we actually, let me just backtrack. There's an interesting thing also. Because we know about the coronavirus before everybody else. Because in December, they were meant to have the book shipped and the first sample. And then it was, we have this virus right now, so we're delaying it. And then became the Chinese New Year came and nothing happened. And the factory is still closed because of the virus. And meanwhile, the virus got around the world. So while now we are here in a very bad situation with the coronavirus, in China, they basically opened again, and the book arrived in the warehouse in the US. So the book is here in the US. That's the good news. All the copies are no longer in China, but here. But the distribution system right now is complicated because normally, as you know, conventions, book tours, and so on is where you basically interact with the audience, sell the books. So this is a bit harder. So we are going to actually order, one box at a time. Clayton will actually sign the books, and it's your chance to order it straight from the source and get your signed copies. So I
want to add two details here. First, I want to add the December factor, because it was really in mid-December that the books got held up in China. So this is the New Year and everything else.
So you guys knew before Trump, apparently, because he claims he didn't know until the end of January.
Mid-March that they stopped the airplanes from flowing back and forth. So the book got stopped in China in mid-December. The traffic from China and the airplanes didn't stop until after that, mid-March. Then the other thing is it's going to be on Etsy. and Ray is running the Etsy account. So if you go to Etsy, you'll be but it will be
Etsy, not Etsy. Etsy is your aunt, I think, but Etsy.
Etsy.
You spell it out for me. I mean, high school.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, Etsy. And then tell us a little bit about your hats. Like, how did your hats become so popular?
Well, it was interesting. This goes back to the gentrification factor. Actually, it was gentrification started to work for me at that time in a way. When Koch came into power, the garment industry was #1 in New York. When he left 3 terms later, it was finished. It was actually after that 3 terms of Koch that we voted in New York City twice never to have a third-term mayor again, and Bloomberg bought himself a third term by spending millions of dollars. But I met this old Jewish guy on Avenue A, and he made baseball caps. So I went in there, and I realized, well, I could have one with an orange peak and a black top and an orange button. So yeah, they're like $3 or something. So he would make it. Then he was making jacket backs for the Savage Skulls, and they had drawing on the back, and it's done in a machine called the Bonaz machine. And so I saw that he could draw with this. Now he made the whole cap, so right from flat fabric. So I asked him if he could do a little drawing on my drawing on each side of that piece of the cap, and he did. It took me a while to convince him, but when he did, then that became the Clayton cap. And he was an older guy, and he retired. So we were able to buy all the equipment from all these bankruptcy sales of all these cap companies that were going out of business. And Alpha, who was very good at crafts, was able to run the machinery and make it happen. And she'd been into sewing when she was a kid and all of that. So we made the caps ourselves. And this goes back to the question of the gentrification. It was possible. Now you have to go to China to get an experiment. How's it going to look? If you were making a printing process book at that time, you go to the printer, you look at it, you go home, and so more red, more yellow, whatever. Now you got to ship it to China, get it back, make a decision. So this was hands-on stuff. So when they had all these small businesses, and that's why I say Bloomberg really killed that with the international corporations, you could actually go there and work with these people because there were all these little tiny companies. I remember in the Empire State Building, there used to be a guy that fixed the old paper machine. You remember when you used to have paper boxes and you used to get that glue paper and you had to you pull up. The guy in Empire State Building, his job was fixing those. Wow. So you had New York was filled. It was a beehive of all these little businesses. So much art came out of Canal Street because you had industrial plastics. And you had all these metal places that sold little sort of brass fittings and stuff like that. So you could make all of this, and you could buy this stuff for next to nothing.
Right.
So what?
I wonder, are they still around? Canal Plastics and Canal Rubbers and all that?
Well, the plastics might be. I'm not sure. But Keith Haring, the vase, the Statue of Liberty,
Keith Haring,
LA too. That was all from industrial plastics. You go in there as this kid, and he sees these big plastic fiberglass vases, and says, "Wow, art." That's what got killed in New York City. Now it's a package of screws on a shelf that's no longer a hardware store.
All right. Now it's a bunch of young people with apps on their phones and putting like animal faces on their bodies and uploading it. It's like, where's the street art? Doesn't exist anymore?
Add an important thing, very important thing. The hats are still around, and actually, I just want to, made in the USA. This is the new
magic.
hat.
How did you make the hat appear out of nowhere?
Out of nowhere. It's magic. You want to see the trick again? So since we had war with the virus, this is the new wash your hand hat.
Oh, there you go.
That we will have actually also. So maybe we can throw a deal in, like selling the hat with a copy of the book before it's available for anybody. So we'll make a deal. All right?
Let's make a deal.
That's why the graphic novel was made into 6 languages. Pull the rabbit out of the hat. Only he pulls the hat out of the rabbit.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Well, Lance, you have any other questions for Julian or?
Yeah. There was with the graphic novel, there was using what do you call it, a fumetti as the glue between the chapters.
Yes, exactly. So the fumetti is like, it's an art form that actually started in Italy. So fumetti is the Italian word for speech bubble. Was very popular also in Latin America, the fotonovela. It was basically the forerunner before the telenovela. And so once TV became more common, and also once VHS tapes became more common, often, you still had fumettis that basically were photo comics as tie-in to movies. But once people could own a movie by buying a VHS tape, this basically ended. So it's a bit outdated, classical, art form that has like a small comeback. I've seen more and more in Latin America artists using fumetti. I personally like the fumetti. My friends are late Seth, totally blanking his last name, Seth Kushner. He was like a photographer who did like amazing photo comics on his website. He died a few years back. So there is this art form still around. And since Clayton is known as a photographer, I thought like the idea of using photography as part of this book is like a nice homage also to him as an artist. Also, and of course, it allowed us to show Clayton because some people confuse him with like a member of ZZ Top. But if you see him, you know the beard, you know, that's Clayton. He started actually, also, it's also funny, if you go for the graphic novel, you see the beard growing and growing. So it's nice to see also that the beard is getting longer the later the chapters are. I want to maybe just also name a few like artists just to... who
are the artists on the book,
Yeah, so we really have a wide range. Of course, Ray Felix is one of them. One of the people I had to run after all the time. We have Summer McClinton. So she worked on a few projects with Harvey Peaker himself. So a very experienced artist. Jesse Lambert, who is a fine artist painter, who basically for the first time did a graphic novel project. Ben Moody, who worked on a few projects, among them the graphic novel on the New Orleans flood. Then we have Chris Wilson. Chris Wilson is, a guy from the neighborhood, basically, musician who does really artworks that reminds us very much of the Crump artwork. So really this independent style. Sean Catedral, involved with the Filipino art scene here. She never did a graphic novel. She came actually to the book launch of Ghetto Brother and told me she wanted to do a graphic novel. So when I was putting together the team, I said, hey, you want to try with a few pages? And she actually has most of the pages in the book because she got so motivated and so much part of it. What I did when possible was to bring people to meet Clayton. That it's not just like an anonymous thing, but really get a sense of him, talk. So one of the artists, Fabrice Sapolsky, was meant to do a whole chapter, and basically, he was so busy with work. He's a co-creator of Spider-Man Noir.
Yeah,
Spider-Man Noir. So when we were close to the end, I never gave up on people. So I basically called him again and said, listen, you haven't delivered the chapter. However, I feel like I can use some of the drawings. So his drawings are in for the biography page. But then I convinced him, like, listen, you want to do something, why don't you do the cover? And he did a beautiful cover design. That was really his concept. So I know I was running a lot after people and driving people crazy, but I never gave up.
That's part of the hustle.
Yeah, a lot of hustling, but the end result really showed that it was worth it.
You had Natasha, None of Your Biz.
Yeah.
And then we had Chris X.
Yeah, Chris Wilson I mentioned. So yeah, we have 17 artists plus then jump into the light, so 18. It's a really nice number of people coming together for this.
Lee Miles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to mention one more thing, and that's one thing that's been really important to me is I met this person by the name of Boris Lurie, and he had this movement started in the 50s called No Art. It's N-O exclamation mark small A-R-T. And there's a website that Dietmar Curvis does, K-I-R-V-E-S, with Julian met in Berlin, and he does Berlin. But he runs this really incredible site called No Art. And I'm hoping to get also this program on the No Art site because Dietmar puts a lot of my links onto that. And a lot of people go to that site. So I wanted to mention that site because I think it's really important. And
we'll make it happen.
The Wild Style site, which I'll give you the information for. I'll give you the links after this program where you can, link up into the people. Because I think if we can get it on the No Art site, which is also Germany, and it has, it's also the world because it's a website. But Dietmar does an incredible job, Dietmar Curvish, and really owe him a lot. He's a big blessing in my life. And that's another place of these links. And sort of how we started talking in the beginning is that if we can share all of our links and all of our people, then small things become big things. Like I also do a thing called the Acra Awards. And the Acra Awards is about honoring the avant-garde. you know, the acre means a noticeable movement in a stream. So you have this, which is the avant-garde. So you have the stream, which is the mainstream, and the little movement is the avant-garde. And so that's becoming another community. And these communities, if we keep building on them as independents, we can really cover the world. And Julian certainly has, with, you know, he's got graphic novels now in Poland and in South America, in France, and all these different places with the different languages, that we can become worldwide in our own way. And as independents, we can build up our own selves, and we can use the internet to do that. And for me, that's one of my, I don't want to call it a crusade, it's got too many things attached to it, but the idea of taking over territory and being small independents and doing that. Because if we can put on some of your graphic novels or your comics on our Etsy site, you know, we can share our communities.
Very true.
And by doing that, we can really, you know, it's like, you know, when you talked about saving the idea of the superhero and using that word, you mentioned different places around the world. Well, we have that potential now, and we really are fighting the international corporations. And so it's really up to us, a small individual, whether it be 8-Ball Radio, which I love. I love that little thing with, you know, young people doing it and all of that. It's adventurous, and it's supporting the next generation coming up. Like I have Cody Simmons, who's been very helpful, and this woman now, Zoe. And so it's really the grassroots, the ruts, and we're the ruts. So we want the ruts out there and boil it into a strong drink and change the world.
Exactly.
We want to change the world.
I think Ram had a question there. Ram.
Well, I was since I write, I was more curious to see how Julian comes up with your ideas. You know, how do you, you know, when do you get those epiphanies? For me, it's like driving in a car with listening to music, going on long walks in the park. You know, where do you come up with these ideas?
It can be really from anything. I mean, my next project is, for example, about Bill Finger. And actually, the project started in Ray's car because we were doing a promotion for Ghetto Brother at the Bronx Comic Book Festival, and he had to drive this woman back who turned out to be the granddaughter of Bill Finger, the secret co-creator of Batman. Wow. We were like talking. I was like, wow, I did not know the story. That was just before the book came out by Mark Nobleman. Yep. So we were talking, and I was like, well, it would be an interesting idea to do like a graphic novel on the whole story, how he, you know, got back the rights for her and so on. And there was even, she didn't even have, there was not even the credit for Bill Finger back then. It was like 2 years later, he was like officially. Yeah.
It was after Batman versus Superman, where Athena started to, she's, the whole time she was advocating to get credit for her and her sister were advocating for that. And then, yeah, that was a car ride. That's right.
That was a car ride. So he was dropping both of us off. So we were chit-chatting. And I said, oh, that would be a great thing. And the book is coming out in the fall. We're finishing it up right now. So it really is like, I mean, it could be anything. You hear something. Once we were driving back from Detroit, you know, I had like visiting friends in Detroit and had like a whole idea for like a Detroit superhero story that we're potentially developing. So it really can be anything. I mean, I feel like a lot, I mean, I come from photojournalism, and so a lot is also, even in my photojournalism, I try to become part of a community. It's not just I come in, takes a picture and run out. So with Benjamin Melendez, it was a lot of conversations, and all the conversations brought the story together. So I take a lot of time really understanding the subject of my work. And so with Clayton, the same. We spent at least half a year, like, you know, every month meeting up and just talking. And the images then, you know, developed in my head while I was working with him, but it could have also led to nothing. So it's often really like the process is slow, but I'm developing it as I try to understand my subjects and create the relationships.
That's amazing. Well, thank you guys. Lance, you had any last thoughts or questions that you want to drop in there?
No, I mean, well, one question I had for Clayton was, when did you first start like photographing at CBGB's? Like around what time period?
You know, I was never a fan of anything. I was always through introductions. In 1972, one thing, you know, drugstores and banks and that used to offer these sort of deals to bring people in. And this drugstore, I think for $25, had this Panasonic camera, which Elsa bought me, a single reflex camera, film camera. And so that turned into me starting to take pictures, and it just went from there. And then I started, when I documenting the Pyramid Club, the Pyramid Club was really interesting in New York because it's like typical Lower East Side. It was extremely diverse, and people don't really remember those stratospheres of the diversity. But in a place like the Pyramid, you had the drag queens, you had the gay scene, you had people like Hell's Angels, you had the skinheads doing the door, you had all these different people. And if you watch Captured, like Jimmy from Gestapo from Murphy's Law, well, these guys were giving us jobs. What do you want? What are these other guys giving us? So he's talking about the drag queens and the gays. So anyway, it was through actually Ray Bees who made it really possible for me. And Ray Bees was also one of those glues and really important parts of the hardcore scene because he really brought people together. And so he allowed me to be, through his guidance, got me into CBs. And like in '87, I did just about every matinee, Side by Side, Sick of It All, Reagan Youth, YDL, Warzone, just a wide variety of hardcore bands. And so it was always through the introductions of other people. And so that's how I got to CBs. And then once I started doing that, the manager, Anthony of the Bad Brains, he would let me videotape the Bad Brains. So that's how I got the Bad Brains thing. And then it was through actually a difficult situation where I got a knock on my door from these street gang guys, bang, bang, bang. And they heard from this woman, Stacy, who was a real pain in the ass, sort of like somebody else we know, Ray. And she was saying, I was telling the cops about what everybody was doing in the park. So they came down, fully out, dressed to the whole outlaw gang jackets and whatever, and said, yo, what's up? So we talked that through, and then eventually they went back to the park and asked people and whatever. And I had a good enough reputation that people knew I wasn't doing that, and I was getting the cops in trouble rather than the other way around. So eventually she was pushed out, and that's how I started documenting the Satan Sinner Nomads. That became a big part of my life, and a lot of the documentation. Then Cochise went to jail, and he ended up, his last bit was 18 years. And I was really sort of instrumental in turning him on to art, because art's a creative process. And you want to talk about godliness, the closest to godliness you have is creation. And art is a form of creation, and he was a very good artist. So Ray, because you teach in institutions and deal with difficult kids in places like, not Spofford, but a place like that where you're at now.
Yeah.
And art.
I used to work with the organization that ran Spofford. So,
really art that changes people's lives.
Yeah, most definitely.
Thing, and it takes you from a bad place and puts you into a good place, and it teaches you skills and gives you pride, and it liberates your mind. And so I was instrumental in with Cochise. There's another guy called Shane Enholm, and he's on my 8-Ball radio show today at 6. And he had been at Rob 29 Banks. He was part of the early punk scene. He was a junkie. Now he became a tattoo artist and everything on his own. But sort of through meeting me, I inspired him to get out of his shell and to go out into the world. And sort of from that, and once again, it's the creative process. It's art. And art really saves lives. The thing that Bloomberg did, how do you destroy a society? The only way really out of the inner city is art, music, and sports.
Right.
I mean, the doctors don't come out of there. It's not that people are stupid. It's just that if you grow up in a doctor's family, part of your life is medicine and talking medical things. Mm-hmm. And in the inner city, you don't have those things, so you don't become that part of your world. So the thing that got me out of the bad end of the working class, besides Elsa, but I met her through art. It was art that got me here. And so art is really important. So Bloomberg was cutting back the art and music. So he's talking about saving society. He's full of shit, that guy. Excuse my language. But the reality is,
he's full of shit.
That's how you get out of the inner city and the working class.
Absolutely.
In sports. And so that's what you need. And that's the whole thing with the immigrants. It was music and art and sports that got them out.
Absolutely.
Edison or any of the, that's a couple of generations later.
We can go on for hours, and I'm sure we will. But thank you guys so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's an honor to have the two of you guys come here and just jam with us and just share ideas and spit politics. Yeah. It's always fun talking to you, Clayton.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure for me, and thank you. It's nice to see Julian again, and Julian hooked this up. So thank you, Julian.
Yeah.